This morning, I'm going to talk about mass. I'm going to talk about where it began, how it developed, and kind of where it's going. Mass is a site-specific installation project that takes place in the context of a big box stores. But before I get into that, I wanted to share a little bit about my creative process, mainly because I feel like it helped kind of set the parameters for this project to move forward. I've realized that I thrive when I'm in an environment that embraces play. So if I'm working with teams or individuals or by myself, as long as I have the parameters that I can tinker with something or experiment or mess around with, and allow that thing to kind of move and become its own entity, whatever it is, even if I don't know what it is at the time, you kind of like follow breadcrumbs. That's an area that I feel like I really do well in. Yeah, so, and I feel like that's kind of how Mass started. So Mass actually began in the automotive section of a Meijer, and I was texting with a stylist and a close friend of mine, and we were texting about a shoot we were working on, and on the shoot, the mood board had a few images of monochromatic like arrangements, mainly like knolled out things like bird's eye view shots. It had some images of just kind of common everyday objects, and it had some still lifes. And I was in the aisle, and I was texting with her, and I looked down the aisle of the car care section, and I noticed everything yellow. And I looked back down, took a step forward, and kind of took a double take back down the aisle. And the only way I can describe it is that all the yellow things were like very present. It's almost like connect the dots in a way. So I thought for a second, and I was like, I'm just gonna do this right now. I'm gonna go build like a little still life right now, like right where I'm at. And so I went down the aisle, and I made a little backdrop with a sun visor, and I arranged a few yellow things, and then I took this photo, which is fine. And then I took a step back, and I took this photo, and which was wildly different. Suddenly, the environment was speaking into the still life, and I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't go to Meijer's to make this thing. It's just something that happened. And I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I took that photo, I put all the stuff back, I left the store, and I just couldn't stop looking at this image the rest of the night. So I actually made it the background of my phone, and it was like every 20 minutes I was just like, man, it's like, well, it's so neat. I don't know what's happening, but it's really cool. So the next day I got off a shoot, and I immediately went to Meijer and built another one. This is like a little more sporty installation. And again, I photographed it, I put everything back, and then this became the backdrop for my phone. And I was just like looking at it, and I was like, something really fun is happening. And I don't know what this is, but this is like really exciting. So then again, the next day, I went back to Meijer, and I built this installation. And this time I was kind of like, I'm gonna see how big I can make this thing. So at this point, I'm like starting to get hooked on making whatever these things are, and I couldn't wait to get out of whatever meeting I was, whatever lunch I had, whatever shoot I had. I couldn't wait to get back out and get back into Meijer to build something. And again, I didn't fully understand what I was doing. I couldn't eloquently talk about it. I didn't have like a big vision for it. I just knew that there was something really interesting happening, and I wanted to explore more of what that thing was. So I started texting a couple close friends what I was doing, and their response was like, did you make that? Or like, did you find that? I was like, yeah, I made it. And they were like super encouraging, and they started giving me feedback and critique. And one of the first conversations we had was, are you putting these things back when you're done? And at the time, I'd only made like 3 or 4, and I'd put them all back, but the critique revolved around, and the conversation we had revolved around, what is this project actually about? Is it about creating a photo, or is it about creating an experience? So if I put everything back, I'm making a photo. But if I leave everything, I'm creating an experience. Suddenly, the thing I'm leaving has the ability to interact with people, and the environment can then engage with the thing as well. So I started leaving them, which I had mixed feelings about. I didn't want to make more work for someone, but at the same time, I felt like leaving it was more true to what was originally so exciting about that first image. So after I started leaving them, the installation process became a little more tense. I started becoming far more aware of the project's subversive nature, but as well as its playful nature. Because suddenly, people have to deal with this thing that's in an aisle, and they're not really sure if it's intentional or not, which I think is kind of funny. So I continued to build, and I kind of started developing a process. I began to introduce construction strategies. I was also kind of beginning to hone in on the form of the pieces. I started introducing repetition. I was trying to mimic the environment. So we're in an environment where there's so many products and everything is the same, and how can that be reflected in the piece? Construction strategy, if things are in repetition, if I can stack them, I can make something bigger, faster. So as I'm doing this, I'm still in a dialogue with my friends. So I'm building something, documenting it, and then shooting a text over to a couple of friends of mine. And they would respond like, oh, it looks great, but you could really use some work on that left side. Or, oh, that's great, but man, you gotta start thinking about your backgrounds a little bit more. Which I always thought was like super funny, because I'm like, you don't understand the context that I'm building this in. Like, it's like a little challenging to like worry about what the left side looks like. My heart is pounding. I'm constantly looking over my shoulder, and depending on where I'm building it, I might have 5 minutes to construct this thing, document it, and get out before I'm noticed. So critique was critique. It was great, and it was frustrating at the same time. But it also helped me develop the project. It also helped me understand more what I was doing. So at this point, the installations are numbering in their early 20s. The form in the process is becoming more consistent. And I also began to start sharing them a bit more publicly. One of my favorite ways to do that was and is through Snapchat. And the reason I like Snapchat is I feel like it reflects the ephemeral quality of the project. The installations only live for a short period of time, and Snapchat is a temporary messaging app. Your message is deleted after a short period of time. So I'm also at this point well into installing into stores other than Meijer. So I'm into all sorts of big box stores. And it's kind of around this point where I start to question or wonder, what am I doing? Like, how does this fit in the larger context of art history? Where does this fit in? What other projects or artists does this relate to? I'm utilizing guerrilla tactics. I don't have permission to do what I'm doing. So it's definitely akin to street art. Graffiti, stenciling, wheat pasting, lock-ons, installation work. So artists like Shepard Fairey or like a Keith Haring or Space Invader. There's Banksy, there's a plethora of street artists. I also began to see parallels with earthworks or land-based works. So land art is a movement that came out of the late 60s, mainly led by Robert Smithson. This is an image of probably his more well-known piece, Spiral Jetty, in Utah. The term site-specific came out of this movement. So artists were physically moving earth and land and reconfiguring it in the same space. So the physical or natural environment suddenly was becoming a canvas. There was lots of heavy equipment used. These pieces tended to be very large. They were exposed to the elements, but the elements were something that were embraced in the work. So the installation you'd visit now is different than the installation you would visit when it was first constructed. So like Spiral Jetty is still in the Great Salt Lake, but it looks different than when it was first constructed. So the environment is slowly eroding the work, taking it back into itself. And this is how I've come to see MassWorks. My landscape is a big box store, and the environment is across the country. The same objects, the same displays, the same layouts can be found here in Grand Rapids, can be found in LA, can be found in Miami, can be found in Nebraska. And the erosion happens at a hyperspeed, sometimes minutes after I finish constructing. And I think that is something that is incredibly fascinating. So around the late 20s, early 30s of installations, I start to think, how else can I use this big box store environment? I mean, if these spaces are really super spaces and they have everything we need, what else can I be utilizing in this space to beyond the actual installation? So I started experimenting and playing around with what the spaces had available. I tried to document myself using the tethered in-store display cameras, which is incredibly hard to be successful at, because they're usually in high traffic areas. It's usually around more valuable merchandise, and so there's a little more security. So anyways, yeah, so these are some stills from the videos that I'd done. So this is like super exciting to me, is that I'm using the resources in the landscape to help perpetuate the project. I also got into all sorts of printing in the custom photo lab. So I was printing t-shirts, sweatshirts, fake magazine covers, totes, buttons, dog tags, which is a really funny, I have a dog tag with like a little mini mask sculpture in it, which I just think that's really funny. And a majority of those things no one's seen. Only a couple of people actually have those items. But that eventually led me to the question, can this space support a gallery show? Can this environment support a contemporary art show in the same context that the installations have been happening? So I started promoting the date and time of a show, and I was going to share the location at the time of the show. I didn't want people showing up early, and I didn't want any sort of store finding out what was going on. So photos of installations 1 through 6 were printed at a Meyer Photo Lab, and then the Friday night before, and at the time I had done only photos of installations 1 through 36. At the time I had done 36 installations and documented all of them. And I had images of those installations printed off at the Meyer Photo Lab. Then the Friday night before the show, I installed half the images into unpurchased frames, and then hid the frames in the back of the shelf. The next morning, the day of the show, I installed the rest of the photos. At noon, I announced the show via social media and a group text that people could sign up for if they wanted to, which was incredibly hard because I was so anxious, and like my hands were shaking, and I was trying to type, and people are texting like, "Hey, where's it at? Where's that?" And I'm like, just leave me alone. And so I sent out the show space, and then frantically started pulling out images from behind the shelves. Within about 10 to 15 minutes, people started showing up, and it was happening. The first mass show was taking place in the home goods section of a Meijer. It was really funny. It was just interesting. If you were to walk down the aisle, so you would see like an aisle with a couple people, an aisle with a couple people, and then an aisle with a absurdly large amount of people wearing black. And everyone just kind of like standing around, looked like shopping for frames. And shoppers were walking through like, is this a thing? What's happening here? Like people, like frame shoppers. And there was a moment like, can we buy these things? And I was like, oh yeah, like I don't own those frames. Like if you want to buy a piece, then grab a piece and like go to the checkout. So it was a surreal and incredibly overwhelming experience. Afterwards, I went home and just like laid on my couch for like 2 hours because I was just so exhausted. So soon after the first show, I took Mass on a tour around the Midwest for the 2 weeks leading up to Black Friday. I slept in Walmart parking lots, I crashed on friends' couches, and I installed installations 36 through 53. Shortly after that, I had Mass Show 2, the second show, at a Target on 28th Street. This show followed the same format as the first, and the response was pretty overwhelming. The first show, people were kind of like polite in a way, like, hey, can we take this? This show, people were just like grabbing things off the shelf. And I was kind of like, oh, like I know this person might be coming, and the show was gone. Like within 15 minutes, all the frames were gone, and people were still showing up. And security was on walkie-talkies, like standing in the middle, trying to figure out what's going on. And my heart is going 100 miles. Oh shit, sorry. My heart is going 100 miles an hour, just buzzing. And I'm like, at a certain point, I was like, I can't take this, and I just left. And I was actually like I thought someone followed me all the way from 28th Street to my house. And I was like, on the phone, I was like, I think someone is following me. So soon after that, Mass was asked to be a part of the Month of Photography LA. So I went to LA for a month last spring, built 17 new installations, which concluded in the third Mass show, which was a good response. All the pieces were gone within about 20 to 30 minutes. In parallel to the in-store happenings, there was also a gallery show that displayed past Mass works, which that was just so amazing. It was the first time I'd seen these images printed out archivally, professionally, and framed so well. I was like, man, this stuff looks so rad. And they're like big, and it's just like such a weird contrast. I'm used to doing a show where it's being printed by some kid behind a counter, hands me over an envelope, and then I go to the frame aisle and I'm sneakily trying to like put them into a frame, compared to like walking into the printing area that does shows for like the LACMA and people in white gloves holding up prints, and I'm like signing and numbering them. It's just like a wildly different experience. And also being at the opening of that show was pretty amazing too, super special. Also great that I didn't have to be like looking over my shoulder worried that I was gonna get kicked out. So that was a pretty amazing experience. The gallery show is continuing to be shown. It'll be on exhibit at Guate Photo in November. It's a contemporary art photo festival in Guatemala. It's kind of like a premier Latin American photo festival. Part of the show will also be on exhibit in Chicago this winter at a gallery. I actually don't know what the gallery is. I'm just told it's a really good gallery. So it's really exciting to see where that has gone. Mass works outside of the gallery context and back into the retail landscape are still also happening. I've been working on a new expression of the project called New American Quilts. This is kind of part of the project. There's another part that I'll share probably in a few weeks. New American Quilts has also been awarded grant funding, which is incredibly exciting, and that will be announced in November as well. I've learned so much in doing this project. Some of the things I've learned, so I feel like I'm more in tune with what was happening at the end of that automotive aisle when the project really began, and I had no idea what I was doing. I couldn't tell you what I was doing. I was just doing something. So I'm at the end of the automotive aisle, and I look, and I see everything yellow, and I look back down. I take a step forward, and I almost just keep walking. But instinctually, I take another look down the aisle, and again, the only way I could describe it is that everything yellow was very present to me. But I guess I feel like I'm more in tune with, like, what was it that I was being introduced to on the first look that was disruptive, that was shocking, that provoked my curiosity, that didn't meet my expectations, that I had to then instinctually take a second look to try to resolve. And so I guess that's kind of the thing that I'm curious about. What is that second look asking of us? Are we being asked to reevaluate our surroundings? Are we being asked to reflect on our purpose in a space? Or are we being called into some sort of action? That is all I want to share with you. I think we're going to take some questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carson. We're going to have time for some Q&A. So one more round of applause really quick. I will kick off the Q&A, and then after that, raise your hand and I can bring the mic around if you need it. If not, just stand up so everyone can hear you. I'd like to start the question and answer session with when you first started doing these, or even at any point when there's the actual installation, for people that weren't your friends or people that were coming to the exhibition, what were some of the most shocking or delightful, what were the most interesting responses that you got from people that just happened to be shopping while you were doing your work?
Yeah, it really depends. Sometimes I would construct and document and just felt like I needed to get out of there as soon as I could, and so I couldn't really stick around. But the best times are when I did have the space I wasn't noticed, and I could just kind of fall back and just watch how people interacted with it. And it's really fun. I mean, to me, the project is successful when there is that double take, when someone looks at it and doesn't understand what's going on, or they look at it, look away, and then all of a sudden they're like, wait, what was that? And then they look again, like they're trying to figure it out. Because I feel like in that moment, when you do that double take, there is your curiosity is being provoked, and you are starting to think about where you are starting to think about the objects, did they mean to put that there? That's a really weird spot for a display, or so I guess the best moments for me are when I would notice people doing a double take or pausing for a second. Yeah.
Can you give us an idea of the duration when you started the project, over what period of time you accomplished this body of work?
Yeah. I don't remember exactly when the first one started, but it would be not this past late spring, but the spring before that. So this project has only been happening for about a year and a half. The first show, the first show actually happened a year ago in like a week or so. I think it's in there in the doc somewhere. I think it was November 8th last year was the first show. So since that first show, it's been a bit of a whirlwind for that project.
Do you have a favorite time and place?
I liked Meyer. I mean, that's probably because I'm from Grand Rapids. I also like Target because I feel like they both do a nice job. Like it's so funny. I've spent so much time in these stores that it's like I know what to expect. Like for the most part in Meyer, but in a Target, like you're never gonna see like a wooden pallet on the floor. But like if you go into Kmart, you'll see a wooden pallet on the floor, and you notice like subtleties in the like quality of the lighting. So I like spaces that have good lighting, that have like wider aisles. But at the same time, those spaces are usually a little harder, a little more challenging to construct in.
Is there a better time?
In terms of time, the weekends are usually not a great time because it's so busy. That's usually when I get followed around by like some secret shopper or something. Which, I mean, there's like a plethora of pretty amazing stories of like being followed around by a shopper. There was one time I was followed around by this guy and I just started following him around. And I made a little video. It's on Instagram somewhere, but I was like videoing it because I was all like so anxious and like worked up, and I noticed him like taking a photo of me, and I kind of noticed how, like usually there's some sort of photo documentation they have to have of you like stealing, and I think at this point I was trying to put a photo into a frame, and I was like. And I was messing with the plastic. It was like really hard plastic, and I was just like, so frustrating. And I looked over, and that guy is like taking a picture of me, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And so I was like, and I was also like kind of tense, nervous, didn't know what to do, and I'm just gonna follow him. And I like turned around and I just started following him around. I was like videoing him, and he wasn't like acknowledging my presence. And I chased him around the store for like 20 minutes, and he would be like darting in and out of aisles and then stopping and like looking at something, like stopping at whatever he could find. Like there's one moment where he stops and just starts looking at purses, and I'm literally like standing. He's like 10 feet away from me, and I'm just facing him with my phone like this, and he's not acknowledging me or anything. And I'm like, and at the same time, I'm like, my heart is just like, I'm like, he's probably freaking out. I'm freaking out. Yeah, so weekends are not always great. But I like late day on a weekday. I think is a really good time. If it starts to get too late at night, there isn't enough people around. Everyone kind of knows who's there for the most part. Yeah.
Have you ever been caught mid-build by an employee?
Oh yeah. Not. Yeah. Yes. Next question. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of what story to tell. Usually I can tell when I'm going to be approached by someone. And at that point, I just kind of like duck out or pretend like I'm shopping. And it's not like on their radar. Like they're not looking out. They're looking out for shoplifters, but they're not looking out for someone stacking things. Like for the most part, they're like, what? Like, what is going on? But yeah, there's this moment in a Walmart, and I was starting to build in like bigger aisles, like more main aisles, and I had gotten a little too cocky, and I was like, oh, I'm just gonna do this right here, and I was like kind of taking my time, and this employee came up to me and was like, hey, excuse me, sir, do you need help with anything? And I looked at her, I was like, no, I'm fine, thanks though. And she was like, okay. She walked away, and then I keep building, and I'm just like really just like, at this point I was like, I'd never been kicked out or anything. And I guess technically I have never been kicked out. I've been intimidated out. But she came back and was like, can I ask what you're doing? And I was like, I looked at her and I was like, well, I'm doing an art project. And she's like, oh really? I'm an artist too. And I was like, really? What kind of art do you do? And we have this conversation about the work she does. She's a painter and she also draws a little bit. I was like, that's cool. Do you like show your work anywhere? Do you have it online? She's like, oh no, like I haven't yet. And I was like, cool. And then, so I'm just trying to like derail the subject. Like I just wanted to kind of go away. And then she was like, so what are you gonna do? Are you gonna like take this somewhere and what are you doing? I'm like, well, it's an installation project. And she's like, oh, so you like put it somewhere? I was like, yeah. And she's like, where are you gonna put it? And I was like, well, I was thinking about just putting it right here. And she like kind of perplexed, was like, oh, well, then what? And I was like, and then I was thinking about taking a picture of it. And she was like, oh, you can't take photos in the store. And I was like, oh, really? And she was like, yeah, you can't do that. And I was like, oh, okay. And she's like, oh, let me go, I'll go get the store manager. You should really ask permission. And I was like, okay. So she went to get the store manager and I just like left. But there's a lot of scenarios like that where it's like I notice someone coming and then I just kind of duck out. Yeah, recently it's been pretty wild. There was like the other week, I went into a Target and for the first time I was actually like recognized by an employee, which it was a wild. I was like literally speechless. But it was also kind of like I probably shouldn't have been in that store. It was a store that I had built an installation in that a photographer had recently followed me around in for an article that had come out. So that had been getting a lot of circulation. So I like came around the corner. I had parked a cart full of green stuff. And then I went and got another cart and I was coming around the corner and I just heard, it's you. And I was like, oh shit. And I heard it over here, I just pretend like I didn't hear it. Like it wasn't like, I don't know who you is, I'm just shopping. And she came up to me and she was like, I saw that cart full of green stuff and I was wondering, is he gonna build something here? Is this happening? And then there you go, coming around the corner with a cart full of green stuff. And I was like, I was speechless. I was like, I couldn't gauge if she was like pissed or if she was like, I was like, and she was like, where are you gonna build it? I wanna watch. And I was like, and the funny thing is there was a reporter that was following me around at the same time. And so there's a reporter in the store, kind of in some other part of the store. And I was like, I didn't know what to do. Like I'm in this scenario and I was like, ooh, you know about this? And she was like, oh yeah, it's been on Facebook, man. I was like, okay, all right. Yeah, so she eventually was like, oh, I'll let you build, I won't tell anyone. She like walked away. So it's pretty wild. It's a mixed response. Yeah, those are a few stories of being like encounters, I guess.
We got time for one more. Everyone's up back there. Oh, no, way back up there.
Have you been contacted by any of the corporate offices, either at Meyer or Target, or
I haven't. No.
how would you feel if they contacted you?
You know what? I to be honest, I'm not really sure. I guess it just depends on what it is they're contacting me about. Maybe like what department? Is it marketing or is it like lawyers? Yeah. Yeah, but I don't know. I'm assuming you're asking if like a marketing department were to contact me, what? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I would feel about that. It's to be honest, I've thought about that and I haven't come to any like resolution about it. It's definitely it definitely does not become what this project is, but yeah, I don't have a great answer for you. Sorry.
Let's give Carson